and I'm going to give a Dharma talk. And, the title is The Land of Bliss. Just as a mother cherishes her child, her only child, develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for all beings. Develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for the whole universe, sending love and goodwill in all directions, above, below, and all around. Beyond all narrowness, beyond all rivalry, beyond all hatred. Whether you are at home or travelling, whether you are standing, sitting, or in bed, in all your hours rest in this state of mind, which is like living in heaven, right here and now. So these are some of my favourite verses. These are verses from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And the Buddha's in this sutta spells, it's a longer sutta than this, but the Buddha spells out a way of living, a path of practicing. And basically what he's saying is if you develop this heart of metta, of loving kindness for all beings, you end up living in heaven right here and now. That's the experience of developing an unlimited heart of metta. And this was the theme of our recent Sangha retreat. And if you're on that retreat, you'll have heard me tell a story, which I'm going to tell again, so forgive me if you already heard it. But when my brother got married, which is a while ago now, I was his best man, and I was placed on the head table next to the priest, the Catholic priest. I think because I was a minister of religion, he was a minister of religion, they put us together. And we got on really well. We were chatting over the course of the speeches and the meal, but he wanted to know, he heard that I used to be a Catholic, I was brought up as a Catholic and I wasn't anymore. And he wanted to know why. So I told him why, and I spoke to him about why I'd stopped being a Christian and a Catholic and why I was now a Buddhist. I can't remember everything I said, but I remember one of the things I said to him is that Christianity had promised to me a heaven, if I believed in God, I'd promised a heaven after death, whereas Buddhism, I could dwell in a heaven right here and now. And that was, I was really attracted to that. And it gave me a path. It taught me a path and practices that I could transform myself and my mind so it taught me how to live in a heaven right here and now. And I talked about other things as well, but apparently the priest was impressed by this. And the next day he gave a sermon about Buddhism at his church. And this word of this got back to my mum, who was really impressed because my mum's a serious Catholic. And up until that point, she'd been really worried about me, that I was definitely going to go to hell because I've rejected Christianity. So they're very concerned about me. But when the priest gave it his kind of seal of approval, she relaxed a lot about me being a Buddhist. That's not part of the talk really, but that was it was important to me. But the bit that is part of the talk is about living in heaven right here and now. That Buddhism teaches the law of karma, and through the law of karma, we act in a way that transforms our state of mind. Our future state of mind will be transformed by the choices we make. The ethical choices we make now will transform our consciousness. This is the law of karma. And the first teachings of the Dhammapada tell us, well, our mind produces our experience, and our mind is produced by our ethical actions. So we dwell in our state of mind. That's the kind of realm that we create for ourselves. Much more true to say that in a way we dwell in our inner world more than we dwell in any kind of outer world. So we create our own world for ourselves, our own realm for ourselves. And Buddhism teaches it's possible to create a heaven for yourself, to dwell in a heavenly abode, a divine abode. And the Buddha taught that the metta and other emotions, important emotions that arise out of metta, are divine abodes, heavenly abodes. So we've been looking at realms that we create for ourselves. As part of this series, we've been looking at the Wheel of Life and the 6 realms of the Wheel of Life, and that through different unskillful states, we can find ourselves, human beings can find themselves dwelling in states of suffering of different kinds, and also in states of pleasure, and they get called heavens, but it's a different type of heaven. It's where you're kind of trapped in experiencing pleasure and you can't make spiritual progress. So we explored these different realms of the Wheel of Life, and how they were traditionally states you might be reborn into, but we relate to them often as states we dwell in, that we produce through our inner world. We dwell in these realms. And then we'd be going on to look at the path as well as the wheel of life. We've looked at the path in terms of the spiral path that leads out of the wheel. And we've been looking at the goal of Buddhism most recently in terms of the image of the Buddha initially, and then a mandala of 5 different archetypal Buddhas who each describe and embody the enlightened state in different ways. They tell us something about enlightenment, the goal of Buddhism in different ways. And we've also, last week, we heard some very engaging talks of people talking about Buddhist symbols that of the goal that really speak to them and help them in daily practice. So, yeah, most often you will find the goal of Buddhism depicted in this way as a Buddha or Bodhisattva figure. And we might think that's the only way of depicting enlightenment. Well, we heard last week it's not, because we saw the stupa, the lotus, the vajra. There's different ways of depicting the goal of Buddhism. But there's pros and cons, and they're very, very rich symbols, as we discovered. Like, as you delve into these figures, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they're full of symbolism that you can, as you go deeper in, they unpack more and more symbolism. But there's a downside to depicting enlightenment in this way. One is it's us looking at enlightenment out there externally, and maybe in an abstract, it doesn't directly tell us about that experience, the inner world, the inner state of a Buddha, an enlightened being. And then the other aspect of it could create a misconception of a solitary enlightenment, so that the Buddha's on his own, or the Bodhisattva's on their own, meditating. They've liberated themselves from suffering, but it's about them, it's about their enlightenment. And it can create, and particularly in the West where we're quite individualistic, we can get a misconception that the enlightened state is about us. It's about me and my liberation and my suffering. So that's a downside of depicting the Buddha in this very common way, enlightenment in this very common way, as a solitary enlightened figure. But the Buddhist tradition has other ways of depicting the path and the goal. And just as we can depict samsara, our kind of suffering state of being trapped on the wheel in terms of realms, Buddhism also depicts the path in terms of realms and the goal in terms of realms as well. So a very traditional image isn't a Buddha on his own or her own meditating, but a Buddha meditating in a Buddha land or a Buddha field with countless beings being led to liberation through the influence of the Buddha. So you get the sense of the Buddha not isolated in their own, but the effect of enlightenment, a field that affects other beings. Well, hopefully you'll get more of a sense of what that means as I talk about it. How can I explain what that means, a field that affects other beings? But yeah, a bit like, and it used to get in cartoons, used to have force fields, or like superhero movies, like there would be force fields that affect people and protect people, insulate people. So it's like an enlightened being has this effect on the world around them, creates almost like a realm that they dwell in, but that also that other people dwell in and be affected by their presence, by their qualities. So it's very different to just a Buddha on their own. It creates a different impression of the enlightened state. This land, this Buddha land, a land with a Buddha, radiating something out that's affecting living beings. So a very famous example of this is the Buddha Amitabha, which is the Buddha I meditate. It's the red Buddha from the 5 Buddha mandala, if you've been following the series. The Buddha Amitabha very famously created for living beings a Buddha land called the Land of Bliss, Sukhavati, the Land of Bliss. And I'm just going to, there's suttas, well, there's a whole school of Buddhism devoted to Amitabha's Pure Land. It's called Pure Land Buddhism. And I'm going to just read a passage describing Amitabha's Land of Bliss, his Pure Land. And then maybe talk about that a bit. So, let's decide what to read. Sukhavati Ananda, the world system of Amitabha, is abundant, bountiful, comfortable, with plentiful supplies of food, delightful, filled with a great many gods and human beings. In that world system, no one is born into a state of misfortune. There are no hells, no animals, no realm of hungry ghosts, and no hosts of titans. The jewels of this world are as nothing compared to those which are found in Sukhavati. And then the Buddha describes to Ananda, Amitabha's Pure Land, he describes trees that are made out of precious jewels. So all the trees in Amitabha's Pure Land are made out of jewels that there's gold, silver, lapis lazuli, just all these different types of jewels, and there's light reflecting from all these jewels. And then he describes the sounds of the rivers. The rivers. Let's see if I can find that passage. Bear with me, because I wanted to mark it with a pencil and I didn't. So bear with me, because my eyes aren't as good as they used to be. So, Ananda, imagine that there were a musical instrument composed of countless hundreds of thousands of parts, and this musical instrument was played with great skill and accompanied by heavenly choirs, such that it created a sound that soothed the mind. That is what the sound of the great rivers of Sukhavati is like. It's profound, ungraspable, unfathomable, and pure. It's a delight to the ear, and it touches the heart. It's enchanting, delightful, and it soothes the mind. It's agreeable and appealing to listen to, murmuring impermanence, peace, no self. It brings happiness to those who hear it, and it reaches the ears of all living beings in that world system. So it describes the rivers, the trees, the birds, the perfumes, the scents as well. The perfumes are delightful. And it's even said that beings living there just have to wish for something and it arises. So they don't have to eat, they just wish for the food and then they experience themselves as having eaten it. So it can sound, when I first heard about this Sukhavati in the Pure Land of Amitabha, I didn't know what to make of it. I thought, that sounds really weird, like a place with trees made out of jewels. Like, what a weird place. But then beings would be born into Amitabha's Pure Land and would be guaranteed to be enlightened. If you're reborn into Amitabha's Pure Land, you're guaranteed to be enlightened. So I think, so unpacking that a little bit, there's a couple of reflections. One, I think, is, what does it tell us? If this is the realm of Amitabha, what does it tell us about his mental state? If we create a realm with our mental states, what must the mental state, the inner world of Amitabha be like? Where every tree is made out of jewels, and the sound is so beautiful of the rivers, and the perfumes are so wonderful. And I think this tells us about the wisdom of Amitabha. Each of the Buddhas has a different wisdom, a different emphasis of enlightened wisdom. And Amitabha's wisdom is he sees the particularity of every phenomenon. He sees everything as unique and precious and beautiful. So if you had that state of mind, the trees would look like jewels, like the trees if you went to Norfolk Park or to Crooks Valley Road, the trees would look like they were made of jewels or gold or silver. And when the wind whistled through the leaves, you'd hear the teaching of impermanence. And maybe it's telling you something about the state of mind of an enlightened being who sees everything in that way. But also it tells you about the effect. Yeah, it tells you a bit about the effect of being around an enlightened being. Like there's these countless human beings, and they're all going to become enlightened because of the influence, the effect of Amitabha as well. So that's Amitabha's Pure Land, Sukhavati, the Land of Bliss. And the community at the London Buddhist Centre is named after it. It's called Sukhavati. And there's a whole school of Buddhism devoted to chanting the mantra of Amitabha and becoming born in Amitabha's Pure Land. It's not how we practice, it's not our approach to practice, but it's a very big school of Buddhism. But it still sounds a bit like a kind of heaven that we'll be born into, a bit like that. Maybe rather than a heaven right here and now, it still sounds a bit removed. But I want to just park that and just explore, well, is it such an odd idea that a Buddha would have this kind of field of influence around them? What is the effect of someone's inner world, their mental state? What kind of world does it create around them? We might have experienced, I imagine you have experienced this in your life, that some people, being around them in such a positive mental state, that it has an influence on you. It has an influence on the people around them. It creates a realm around the world around them, and you feel uplifted by that, or you feel inspired by that, and it's infectious. So Padmavajra's like that. I don't think like being described like that, but that's my experience. Like if he comes and visits Sheffield and he leaves and pretty much everyone feels uplifted and more confident. I do. I feel like all my doubts disappear when he's here. Just like, yeah, you know, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm doing, and I'm even more confident than I was about it before. It just has that effect on me. When I go to Padmaloka, where he lives with the other Mitra conveners, and he leads us for a week's retreat, just it feels like a pure land, actually. It feels like we create this kind of pure land for the week. Without hindrances and without doubt, and everybody's uplifted by that. And you've probably also been around people in negative, very negative states of mind, and the kind of world and realm that can create, in the atmosphere that can create as well. So it's probably not, you know, maybe it sounds like a myth and a legend, but it's not. It's true in a very direct way that we create a realm for our mental state, and it affects the people around us. Okay, but the Pure Land of Amitabha, that sounds a bit like dying and going to heaven for me. So what else can we learn about Pure Lands and about Buddha fields? And there's a very famous and important Mahayana Sutra. So the Mahayana school of Buddhism is thought by scholars to have come a bit after the time of the Buddha, but captures the compassionate aspect. It particularly emphasizes the compassionate and altruistic aspect of the historical Buddha and his teaching. So the Mahayana school of Buddhism has these more imaginative, it's kind of like cosmic science fiction kind of sutras where these crazy things happen. It's a different type, and it's a world that you hear these sutras. I suppose these Pure Land sutras are a bit like that. You hear it described and you enter into it imaginatively. It's not meant to be. It's a different type of teaching than the lists that you learn, the kind of Dharma lists. Anyway, so the Mahayana Sutra called the Vimalakirti Nadesha Sutta. And the Vimalakirti is a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a being who is devoted to enlightenment, not just for him or herself, but for all beings. And all of their energies are devoted to that. And Vimalakirti, in a way, this is a sutra which tells us about the bodhisattva and that way of practicing, very altruistic way of practicing, which perfumes our approach to practicing here in Triratna and in Sheffield. So Vimalakirti, he's given a teaching to 500 youths who've come to visit him. He's giving them a teaching. And they ask him about, there's an image actually, I'll share an image from the sutra. They all come with a separate parasol, a separate umbrella, got their own individual umbrella kind of sheltering themselves. And Vimalakirti turns it into one big umbrella just sheltering all of them. So I think that's a striking image. I might come back to that, but this image of all the separate umbrellas just becoming one large umbrella. He turns it into one large umbrella. But they ask Vimalakirti about a bodhisattva's Buddha field. What is it, and how does it become purified? So I'm going to read Padmavajra's translation of this. Padmavajra is our president who's the guy who has this effect on me. He's coming on Sunday. It's his translation of part of it. Okay, good young man. Your question about the purification of the Buddha field is good. Therefore, listen well and engrave what is said on your heart. I will begin by speaking to you of the purification of the Buddha field by the Bodhisattva. Very good, Lord, replied the 500 Lichavis. Then the Lord said, Noble sons, the Buddha field of Bodhisattvas is a field of living beings. Why is that so? A Bodhisattva embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that he or she develops living beings. He embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that living beings become disciplined. He embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that through entrance into a Buddha field, living beings are introduced to the Buddha wisdom. He embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that through entrance into the Buddha field, living beings increase their noble spiritual faculties. And he goes on, there's more. A Bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of high resolve. When he attains enlightenment, living beings who have accumulated all the stores of virtue will gather in his Buddha field. It basically describes the Buddha field of a Bodhisattva and the effect it has on living beings. But there's a very significant thing he says at the start, which is the Buddha field is a field of living beings. So that's I like that more, that the idea that it's not something I'm going to die and be born into, but it's a bodhisattva's Buddha field is created when a bodhisattva starts to gather living beings around them into a community. He creates a community of living beings, and it's the kind of purity of the Buddha field, the kind of power, the potency of the Buddha field depends on the practice of the bodhisattva in a way, and the extent to which living beings develop in that Buddha field and their spiritual faculties develop. So it's a community that the bodhisattva is gathering around him or her, which develops living beings. It brings them on towards awakening, towards enlightenment, and they're attracted to. It's conducive. It's an environment that's attractive and conducive to them. So this becomes more. This is a very attractive idea of a Buddha field to me. The idea of a community of people practicing, gathered around maybe a bodhisattva. That would be nice to have a bodhisattva to gather around, but. Where it's conducive, it's an environment that's conducive to growth and to development of living beings. Bear with me, I've lost my place. So traditionally, it would be the practice of a bodhisattva to gather a community like this. And it's a community of living beings. It's not a place that we die and are reborn into. It's here and now. It's a place that we live in, living beings dwell in and create together as a community. And Sangha, our teacher, he advises ourselves, it's probably not wise to see ourselves as being a bodhisattva or trying to be a bodhisattva. He says instead, we could see our order or our Sangha or our community as a bodhisattva. Collectively, it's probably too rich or too dangerous to try and, for our conceit and our kind of self-centeredness, to think, I'm going to become a great bodhisattva that liberates beings. But better to think, well, as a community, we could become one together. We could have the effect of that great being who creates a Buddha field. If we all kind of practice together, we could create one among ourselves. And the image he has in mind for this, and he's given us for this, is of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, which is behind me. So you might have come across this image before, you might not have done. It looks very strange if you haven't come across it before, but it's a being made out of light, a bodhisattva, with 11 heads looking in all directions, seeing the suffering of the world in all directions. And there are 1,000 hands, each hand has an eye in it to seeing clearly with wisdom. And each hand holds a different implement to respond to the suffering of the world. So Avalokiteshvara is the embodiment of compassion, responding to suffering in the world. And it can see suffering wherever it arises and responds in the way that's needed with a different hand that is appropriate to what's needed. And Sangha says, well, we, rather than getting self-inflated and aspiring to become a bodhisattva ourselves, why not aspire to be a hand of Avalokiteshvara? We could be we could be a hand of Avalokiteshvara. And if enough of us are practicing intensely, there could be 1,000 hands of Avalokiteshvara, and we could be as a community, like that bodhisattva. And if we can be as a community like that bodhisattva, well, then we can create a Buddha field, we can create a Buddha land, we can create a field around us, and the purity of that Buddha field will depend on the purity of our practice. And as we purify and we develop the Buddha land will become more and more intense, and will develop more and more living beings will become attracted to it and will develop by that. And Sangha says this is how we should see a Buddhist centre. We should see a Buddhist centre as like a pure land, a Buddha field, a pure land in an impure world. And for me, that is both an image of the goal and of the path. So we've been talking about images of the goal being a solitary Buddha figure or bodhisattva figure. Well, this is a very different image of both the path and the goal of an enlightened being surrounded by a community or community of enlightened beings. And it's said also, Sangha has said, it's more likely that the conditions for the arising of the awakened mind, for the bodhicitta, will be in amongst a community of intensely practicing individuals. So for me, that's a really powerful and beautiful image, that as a community we can create that sphere of influence in the world, a pure land, a Buddha field in Sheffield. 20 years ago, well, longer than 20 years ago, people started to teach Buddhist classes in Sheffield in the 80s. So initially, I think Bodhinaga was part of those people with the Windhorse book publishing team in Crooksmore Road. And then a centre was founded with Punyamala and Advaya Chitta, the first order members, to move to Sheffield and set up a centre in the 80s. He invited Sue Siddy to come from Glasgow, who had founded the Glasgow Buddhist Centre, to found a Buddhist centre in Sheffield. And that was founded in Crooks, in Broom Hill. They had a centre on Crooksmore Road. And then 20 years ago, Atra, who's here this evening, he helped to negotiate for us the purchase of this building, and got a good deal. He got a good deal, and then helped to renovate the building, lead the Sangha as it was then. And all those people who poured all that energy into renovated this building 20 years ago, turned it into a Buddhist centre from a derelict Catholic church with a roof that was about to fall in. They turned it into this amazing building, and over the years, the grounds have been developed by Soyamati and her team of volunteers and gardeners. But at the time, when I hear people talking about the time, people were concerned, some order members were concerned, well, how are we going to fill this building? We've only got a small Sangha, we're buying a building, which is huge. How will this is a big risk, this is a gamble, we're not going to fill this big hall full of people, we've only got a really small Sangha. But the order members, some order members at the time, I think Amoga Banksa was the chair at the time, and he was very optimistic, as he is, and ambitious, and had a vision. And he got also Vidanya involved to create a pathway of classes and a vision of a Sangha, to build a Sangha and create a Sangha of living beings, a community of living beings in Sheffield, and create an environment, a culture that would develop and ripen living beings. So, I got involved not 20 years ago, but in 2004, so 17, 18 years ago. At that point, Sangha Night was Vidanya and Vajratara teaching, and there's about 25, 30 people would be a good Sangha Night. And there was one men's Mitra study group, I don't know about on the women's side, about 12 order members. But it was amazing. There was a real atmosphere and an energy, and it was really, really exhilarating. Going to Sangha Night and hearing them talk would make the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and it was just amazing the energy they had, the vision that they had, and over time, steadily more and more people were attracted to the community and the Sangha. And 20 years later, Sangha Night, we have got a room full of people, and we haven't got enough space to be able to cater for the Mitra study groups that want to, all the people who want to study Dharma on Mondays and Thursday nights, and we've got 50 order members and more counting, but more and more people being ordained all the time in Sheffield. And so it's, that's happening, that effect, it's attracting people, and people are being transformed, people are developing when they encounter the Sangha and the community. And I've seen it happen. I've seen them look at Mighty Varsin, Paranita there at the front, Panya Hridayas, kind of friends of mine, people who've become ordained recently, and just how different they are to when they arrived, and who they are now, the beings that they are now, and the effect that they're having on other people. I'm massively different to when I first arrived, and it's just amazing. It's happening. We are creating this field of influence in Sheffield, in Walkley, in a small way. But it's growing and it has momentum, and who in 20 years, what might happen? Where might it be? There might be other Buddhist centres in Sheffield and South Yorkshire. We might have a retreat centre. Who knows how many hundreds of order members there might be? I don't know. So this is interesting. The idea of our Buddhist centre as a realm, this centre as a realm, a Buddha realm, a field, a community, a Sangha, a community of living beings that creates a realm. So individually we know we live in a mental state, but collectively, we influence we're in relationship with each other, we have an effect on each other, and collectively we create a realm that we experience, that we live in. And people, it's not just a crazy idea, it's something tangible that people feel. You might have felt it when you came to the Buddhist Centre, when you come to Sangha Night, when you came to the intro course, when you come in the shrine room, when you come to festivals. It's tangible, there's an atmosphere. And there's a very experienced order member, senior order member, and she used to work in the NHS at a time when it was changing and deteriorating, and she found it oppressive to work there, becoming more like that. And when she left work and started to walk to the Buddhist Centre and arrived at the Buddhist Centre, she said it felt like she was entering a pureland. and all of the kind of troubles and difficulties dropping away from outside. So that's something to reflect on. I'd ask you to reflect on that, maybe talk about in that group. Does that resonate with you? Do you experience the community in that way? It's something about the building, but it's not just the building either, because we went to Lockerbrook and it was the same there. The same atmosphere was there at an outdoor activities barn in the Peak District, and we were dancing. Some of us were dancing on the dance floor on Saturday night together, and the atmosphere was there then as well. It's not just the bricks and mortar; it's the people, it's the community, and the atmosphere, and it creates a realm, and it does change people. So maybe to end, like things to think about for yourself. Could you think about your practice and your aims for practice, as well as thinking in terms of your own growth and development? Could you think about the effect that you have on other people? The sort of field that is created by your actions in your world, the people that you interact with, by your speech, your mental actions, your ethical choices. Could you think about your practice more in that terms of other people, the effect that you have on other people, the field, the realm that you create around you? And could you think about your practice as well as focusing on your own experience, maybe of a nice meditation or becoming calmer, whatever it might be that you're important for your experience? Could you think it also about a practice of creating Sangha together that both will benefit you and will benefit other people? That's a very inspiring way for me to think about my practice. My practice is about this Sangha. If I get up and meditate, I'm doing it because it affects this Sangha. It doesn't just affect me, which it does, but it has a cumulative effect. If all of us really intensely practice and all of us make progress, just imagine how great the Sangha will become. But just so each of us, as a hand of Avalokiteshvara, I think it was Aryadasa said to Vidanya one time, he wants to be the best hand of Avalokiteshvara he can be. So if we're all strong, become the strongest, most potent hands of Avalokiteshvara we can be, then we could create a really potent Buddha field for the people of Sheffield. And that's exciting, isn't it? So what I'd like to encourage you, come on Sunday when you can hear people talking about the founding of the centre, the vision behind it. You'll see slideshows, you'll see photos of people like me looking younger and how it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So here can we hear stories about that, and that'll be very inspiring. Next week, we're going to have a talk from Panyu Hidayah talking about the Buddha's advice to his disciples, how to build a community, how to build a Buddha land. We'll be hearing a list from the Buddha about how to do that next week. So maybe I'll just end. I'll read that section from the Karaniya Metta Sutta again. I'll read Padmavajra's translation of the same passage. Just as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, bring forth an all-embracing loving mind. Bring forth unbounded love for all the world. Above, below, across, in every way. Love unobstructed without enmity. Standing or moving, sitting, lying down, whatever you're doing, be free of laziness and wield this blessing power of mindfulness of boundless love. For this is what the wise call abiding in the divine. Thank you.